I love tourism. My family and I go on several trips a year. This summer, actually, we went to Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah for 2 full weeks and got to camp, see the Grand Canyon, and many other awesome national parks. Tourism is awesome, but there's a growing new kind of tourism in America. It's a weird kind. You probably haven't heard of it before. You'll see exactly what kind of tourism this is through a story. CNN reports on December 18 that two men from Philadelphia moved to Minnesota. Only a few months later, their net worth had increased by $3.5 million, and they were being prosecuted by the Department of Justice for fraud. This new kind of tourism is called fraud tourism. And we can see it specifically in this instance in Minnesota. You see, Minnesota has become a magnet for fraud. This is important in understanding today's prompt. What will the fallout from the Minnesota fraud scandal be? These two men are just a small instance, or are just an example of how attractive the incentives for fraud in Minnesota are. Clearly, it was extremely simple to steal money from the government, given that these two men from Philadelphia were able to extract so much in just a matter of months. So, to answer this question, we look at 3 points. First, we'll talk about fraud tourism and the fraud in Minnesota. Second, we'll talk about the welfare programs in the United States and some of their issues. And third, we'll talk about the implications of these welfare programs and the fraud scheme in Minnesota on American politics. So let's start with fraud tourism. As we've explained already, Minnesota has become a magnet for fraud. As continuing that CNN article, a nonprofit organization called Feeding Our Future received $250 million in federal funding meant to go to feed starving children during coronavirus. Instead, this organization stole all that money and sent it to its own founders. That's $250 million in misappropriated funds. This issue in Minnesota is broader than simply feeding our future, though. Many other companies and individuals have been prosecuted, and 62 of them, CNN reports, have been convicted. Fox News on January 15, 2026, gives additional context to exactly what's going on in this fraud scheme. Fox says that many of those committing fraud, in fact, the clear majority, were Somali immigrants. It notes that many of the immigrants, in fact, sent this money back to their homeland in Somalia instead of using it for their own personal needs. Fox notes that this proves that they don't actually need this welfare money because they're able to send it overseas to others. This immense amount of welfare fraud is extremely concerning, and it's become a growing pattern in America, as you'll see in our second point, looking at fraud in America. I was looking at welfare in America, excuse me. So, to understand welfare programs in general, we have to understand poverty. So let's start with that. How does someone get into a cycle of poverty? Well, there are two options: bad luck or bad choices. Here's the thing. In America, if you make the right choices, you have an extremely low chance of ending up in poverty. Because bad luck is much less common in America. What does that mean? That doesn't mean that luck doesn't exist, but it does mean that America has far fewer disasters. Wars, for example, don't affect everyday Americans as they might people in other countries. Or natural disasters, again, have a far smaller impact on Americans than floods and tsunamis might in another country. So we can see here that bad luck is not as strong in America as it is in other countries. America has a system of rules where you are able to make your own choices, and if you make the right choices, that will very likely lead you out of poverty. The Fraser Institute, in a 2019 report, demonstrates this by noting that there are 3 factors that lead people out of poverty. It says that making 3 decisions: having kids after you're married, graduating high school, and working full time. After making those three decisions, you have a 2% chance of living in poverty. If you fail to meet all of those decisions, you have a 76% chance of being in poverty. And even doing one of those makes your chance of being in poverty go down from 76% to 26%. These are hopeful statistics because they show that choices in America can change your poverty level. So, we can see here that America has a welfare system that goes out to those in poverty. But many of those in poverty are there because of bad choices they've made. And unfortunately, the welfare system has no way to motivate those people to make different decisions in their lives. It simply hands them money and expects and allows them to continue living just the same way they are. As that Fox News article reported, much of that welfare money in fact went to Somali terrorist groups. So what's the implication of this welfare fraud scheme? Well, there are several directions this could go. The blame could go in three different directions. First, the blame could go towards welfare, where money is sent to individuals with zero responsibility or expectations. Second, the blame could go to Somali immigrants, and they could be blamed for their terrible culture, and illegal immigration could be blamed, and even legal immigration, for causing these Somalis to come into Minnesota. Or third, the Democrat Party, which is in charge of Minnesota, could also be blamed, seeing as how they've presided over this situation, whether knowingly or unknowingly. Based on these articles, it seems that unfortunately welfare itself and the unfortunate welfare systems in America will not face the blame. Instead, we can see that Somalis and the Democrat Party in Minnesota has been taking much more of the blame. So, if patterns continue, these will be the likely implications.